The learning objective of today's lecture includes overview of bryophytes, classification of bryophytes, their structure, reproduction, and importance. So we have seen this chart before where we see that kingdom Plantae is divided into first two main groups depending on whether the plants have seeds or not. In the seedless plants, we have already talked about alga, and now we are talking about bryophytes. So bryophytes are a bit more advanced than alga because they have some root and some leaf-like structure which gives them the appearance of being plants. So bryophytes mainly include mosses, liverworts, hornworts, and they are the non-vascular plants which live on land. They do not have a true root system, stem, or leaves. They mainly thrive in a moist environment. They take up moisture or water from their surroundings because they do not have a vascular system. We saw that alga mainly remains in water, and during the evolution, bryophytes are considered as the pioneers in colonizing bare rocks and soil, and they also contribute to the soil formation. Now let's talk about the evolution of bryophytes. Bryophytes have evolved from green alga, and they share chlorophyll A and B with the green alga. Bryophytes were first among those plants that could adapt to the terrestrial life. Bryophytes have several adaptations. For example, they have thin cuticle, they have protected gametes, and they display poikilohydry, which is the tolerance for drying conditions. Bryophytes also have alternation of generation, in which in their life cycle they have a gametophyte and a sporophyte, out of which gametophyte is the dominant phase and the sporophyte is the dependent phase. Bryophytes break down rocks, and that is how they contribute in formation of soil. Because bryophytes are present on the land surface, they show the need for vascular tissue that further leads to the evolution of vascular plants. Now let's talk about the habitat and distribution of bryophytes. Bryophytes are mostly present in the moist environment because they do not have a vasculature of their own. They are distributed worldwide from tropical rainforests to Arctic tundras. Some bryophytes can also survive in deserts, high altitude, and polar regions. During an ecological succession, that is the formation of a new ecosystem, the bryophytes are mainly the first to colonize bare and distributed soils. Now let's talk about the three main classes of bryophytes. First is Bryopsida. Plants in this class are leafy and dense, and they are found in diverse habitats from forests to urban areas. The example of plant here is a moss. The next class is Marchantiopsida. It includes the plants that can form thallus and appear leafy. They thrive in moist and shady areas and often grow close to the ground. The example of plant in this class is liverwort. The next class is Anthoceratopsida. They have unique, elongated sporophytes which look like horns, and they typically grow in damp soil. Now let's look at some general characteristics of bryophytes. Bryophytes do not have vasculature, that means they do not have tissues like xylem and phloem, which is why they depend on the process of diffusion for obtaining nutrients and water. They have gametophyte as their dominant stage of life, and they possess root-like system which is called rhizoid that helps in anchoring them to the substrate. Water is required for reproduction as the sperm is flagellated and they have to swim to reach the egg for the process of fertilization. Their structure is much simpler and they are adapted to moist and shady environments. Let's talk about the structure of bryophytes. The bryophytes can have a thallus or a leafy body. Thallus means they can have a body which is flattened and looks more like a ribbon, or they can have small leaves as in case of mosses and liverwort. Instead of proper root system, they have rhizoids, which are thin hair-like structures that kind of acts like roots. Gametophyte is the dominant phase of their life cycle, and gametophyte can also perform photosynthesis to carry out most of the plant's function. The sporophyte has foot, which you cannot see here, setae, this long stalk, and capsule, in which the spores are produced. That is why it is called a sporophyte, the stage of life cycle that produces spores. Bryophytes also have a thin layer of cuticle on their surface to prevent the loss of water. Let's have an overview of the reproduction in bryophytes. Bryophytes can have sexual or asexual reproduction. Their asexual reproduction is through fragmentation and gamma cups. Gamete or gamma cups are small multicellular structures which can grow into a new plant without undergoing a sexual reproduction. For sexual reproduction, bryophytes have specialized organs called antheridia and archegonia, in which antheridia behaves as a male part and archegonia behaves as a female part. Water is essential because the sperm has to swim to the egg for the process of fertilization. Fertilization results in a zygote that develops the sporophyte. In the life cycle of bryophyte, you will see a gametophyte and a sporophyte. That is why they have alteration in their generations. Out of the sporophyte and gametophyte, the gametophyte is the dominant phase of life. Now let's have a look at the alteration of generation in bryophytes. We know that alteration of generation means when some of the stages of life cycle of a plant are haploid, which are gametophytes, and some stages are diploid, which are sporophytes. Now here you can see that the sporophyte, which is diploid, will undergo meiosis, and after meiosis the chromosome number is halved. So starting from 2n, you are left with n number of chromosomes. So meiosis leads to the formation of male gametophyte spore and female gametophyte spore. Now from these two, the male gametophyte and female gametophytes are formed. Remember that gametophytes are haploid structures. The male gametophyte forms antheridia and female gametophyte forms archegonia. The fertilization between the two leads to the formation of zygote, which is a diploid structure. From this diploid structure, we see that a sporophyte is formed. That's why in the life cycle of a bryophyte, you will see two main structures. One that is diploid and one that is haploid. Let's look at the anatomy of mosses. Mosses have a simpler structure, sometimes only one cell layer thick. They lack any veins, that means they do not have any vasculature for transportation of water or nutrients. For the function of root, they have rhizoids, which are thin hair-like structures that help them to anchor to the substrate and absorb water and nutrients from the surroundings. As we have seen before, the dominant phase of their life cycle is gametophyte because that is the stage in which it remains for the longest time. The sporophyte stage has a foot, setae, and capsule, and it is kind of dependent or growing on the gametophyte. The capsule is present at the tip of the sporophyte, and that is where the spores are produced, and that is where the spores are released from, as you can see in the structure here. Now let's look at the anatomy of liverworts. Liverworts have thalloid or leaf forms, so they may have a structure which looks like a ribbon or that look like leaves. They also have rhizoids. They may have gamma cups like you see here, which are the structures of asexual reproduction. They have oil bodies, which are unique organelles that contain essential oils. They also have a smaller sporophyte structure, which is mainly attached to the gametophyte structure, and they also possess cuticles to prevent the loss of water. Now let's look at the anatomy of hornworts. Hornworts mainly are thallus. They have this ribbon flat-like structure. They also have rhizoids in place of roots. They have large chloroplasts that performs the process of photosynthesis. Their sporophyte looks like a horn-like structure. They also form symbiotic association with cyanobacteria, which lives in their thallus cavities, and this bacteria helps in fixing nitrogen. Hornworts also have cuticle, which is a thin layer on their surface that helps in minimizing the water loss. Bryophytes have several contributions to the ecosystem. First, they help in formation of soil through the process of breakdown of rocks. Bryophytes can absorb and retain large amount of water, helping in maintain moisture in the ecosystem. They perform a lot of photosynthesis, which is why they reduce the atmospheric carbon dioxide. They provide microhabitat to small organisms like insects and microorganisms and even some small invertebrates. Because bryophytes are so sensitive to pollution, they are sometimes used as the bioindicators to see if there is good quality of air in an ecosystem or not. Now let's look at the economic importance of bryophytes. The mosses like sphagnum are extensively used as potting mixes in horticulture. Sphagnum is also used as a fuel and a soil amendment. Bryophytes also have antibacterial property and they are used in several home remedies. Mosses can also absorb impurities and control water flow in filtration systems. Bryophytes are also used as bioindicators to monitor the air quality and detect the pollutants. Now let's look at some key adaptations in bryophytes. They display poikilohydry, which is the tolerance of dry conditions and rehydration when there is water availability. They have thin cuticle on them, which prevents the loss of water. They have specialized structures called antheridia and archegonia, which helps in protecting gametes from drying and stress. They have rhizoids, which help them to anchor with a surface and also in some water absorption. Their dominant phase of life cycle is gametophyte phase, which performs photosynthesis and uptake of nutrients. Their dense structural form also helps in reducing the loss of moisture. Some challenges faced by bryophytes are they do not have vasculature, that means they do not have xylem and phloem. That is why they have to depend on their environment for the direct availability of water. They are also dependent on water for their sperm to swim and reach the egg for the process of fertilization. That is why they have to be in a humid habitat. Because water is so essential for them, they cannot tolerate the drying condition for a prolonged period of time. Because they lack vasculature, their heights are restricted and even their exposure to sun is also restricted because they cannot grow very tall. They are often outcompeted by the vascular plants, which can obtain nutrients and transport nutrients to different parts of their body. Bryophytes are also very sensitive to air and water pollution, which is why their growth in urban environment is drastically impacted. Now let's summarize what we have just studied. Bryophytes such as mosses, liverworts, and hornworts are non-vascular plants. They rely on the process of diffusion for obtaining water and nutrients. Gametophyte is the dominant phase of their life cycle, and their sporophyte is dependent on their gametophytes. They can tolerate some level of desiccation but not a lot because they depend a lot on water. Water is required for the sperm to swim to the egg. That is why they require water for the process of reproduction. Bryophytes also help in the formation of soil by breaking down large rock pieces. The main limitation of their spread is that they have to be in the moist environment because they do not have a vascular system, and they are also dependent on water availability for fertilization.